Hey guys, so I'm going to be talking about the American Savior narrative in Between Shades of Grey by Ruta Sepetys. And what I mean by that is throughout Between Shades of Grey, we see America being depicted as a sort of savior by the prisoners, um, especially with the repeater, as I'll talk about a little bit later. Um, but throughout the entire novel, every time America is mentioned, it's mentioned as if America equals freedom. Um, and on page 183, I'm gonna flip there real fast. At the top of 183, it says, "What about America or Britain?" asked Mrs. Remus. "Surely they'll help." "Nothing yet," said Mother, "but soon I hope." So here we see kind of the first instance where America is mentioned as if, of course, they will help if they only see what's happening. Um, and here, Mrs. Remus kind of depicts American Britain as this Western marker of liberation. And this kind of becomes more and more complicated the farther we go into the text. And on page 259, um, second while I flip there. On page 259, the repeater says, towards the bottom, "They are preparing us, preparing," said the repeater. "We shall feast every day in America, every day." And this is kind of a recurring thing with the repeater, as Lena calls him. He keeps on saying, "America is surely going to help us. They're going to come. We're going to America." And we see this again on page 261. "They're putting us on boats, don't you see? We're going to America, America," said the repeater. Again, he sees boats and he thinks, of course we're going to America. He wants to believe that. But towards the bottom of that page, we see Lena thinking about what's happening, and she says, "I saw Andreas's face. When he told me we were on the list, something about his expression told me we weren't going to America." And even Lena here kind of associates America with freedom. She associates America as savior. And this becomes more and more complicated as we move through the rest of the text and we look into the historical context surrounding this historical moment in the text. And on page 280, um, we see Jonas finding this boat that's coming in, and he says, "Mother, there's a ship. It has an American flag." "The Americans have arrived. They've arrived," said the repeater. "Will the Americans fight the NKVD?" asked Janina. "Stupid girl, the Americans are helping the NKVD," said the bald man. "They're hiding us," said Mother. "The guards don't want the Americans to see us, to know what they're doing to us." Um, and here even we see Elena, Mother, um, kind of side with this idea that if only the Americans could see what's happening, of course they would come and help. But the bald man, as he normally does, he's much more pessimistic, and in this case, much more realistic. Um, and he says, no, they're siding with the NKVD. And to an extent, that's sort of true. Um, I remember in our discussion last week, someone said that the bald man is kind of the anchor to reality in a lot of cases. Yes, he's annoying, yes, he's pessimistic, but he's realistic when everyone else is being a little too optimistic in a way. Um, and he kind of, in this instant at least, anchors them down to reality and what's going on in the text. But to look at this, we need to think about what was happening with America in this historical moment. America is often praised as being the hero for freeing the prisoners from Nazi Germany in World War II, but we sometimes forget that at the same time that this was happening, they were keeping Japanese Americans in internment camps, as we see in within these lines. Um, And sometimes it is hard to realize that these two moments were happening in conjunction with each other. When I read within these lines, it was hard for me to imagine that this depiction of America that I saw through Evelina was the same historical moment that was happening all the way in Soviet Russia and Lithuania. And it was hard to really wrap my head around how this could be happening at the same time. But it also makes me wonder what makes America so much better than the Nazis or the Soviets. If they were doing much the same thing, they were keeping innocent citizens captive in these concentration camps. And to further put this in historical context, on page 253 of Between Shades of Grey, if I can flip there. We just see this mention of Pearl Harbor at the bottom. It says, "The Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. They bombed," said the man. "Pearl Harbor? They bombed America," said Mrs. Remus. And that sort of puts this into perspective because it asserts that it ties it back to what's happening in Western culture, what's happening in America at this time. Because sometimes it can feel far removed from the culture that we know, reading from their perspective of Lena, a Lithuanian. But this kind of anchors it back to the American culture, the American experience at this moment, and back to what we see Evelina and Taichi going through and within these lines. And again, on page 257, we see them talking about what's going on outside of the Lithuanian prison camps that's happening right now. And at the bottom, they say, "The Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor. The United States may already be allied with the Soviets. Enough talk, be quiet," said the bald man. "We're going to America," said the repeater. America. And this is kind of in line with both the bald man and the repeater's characters, because the bald man says, "No, this is what's happening. This is the kind of pessimistic take." But the repeater wants so much to believe that America is going to be this righteous savior. America is going to come and save them. Um, but really, where was America in all of this? Because we learn at the end of the novel that Lena and Jonas had been held captive for 12 years, which is longer than the time of the war. So where was America after the war ended? Where was America after they entered the war after Pearl Harbor? Um, and this kind of becomes complicated because we wonder what is the difference between America's position politically and morally. Um, America was sided with the Soviet Union in the Allied forces. Um, so, in a way, the bald man was sort of right because they were allied together. But this brings the question of at what point is America really on this high horse of morality? At what point does politics overrule morality? Um, we like to think that the United States is going to choose morality over politics, but that doesn't happen in this scenario. Um, so it kind of makes us question this savior narrative surrounding America in this text, and even in a larger picture culturally. But to look at America in between these lines, we need to remember that the author Ruta Sepetys is an American citizen. Um, and it kind of makes me wonder, why did Sepetys, as an American author, write the United States in such a light? She could have chosen not to mention America at all in Between Shades of Grey, but she does, and she does it in this way. So that's kind of my question to you guys. Why do you think that she wrote it in this way? And looking at the secondary sources, we see Shoko Tanaka say Between Shades of Grey had to be narrated by the American Sepetys, who was other to the traumas rooted in the Soviet deportations. The novel could not have been narrated otherwise, for the hegemonic ethno-nationalist narratives, which stem from the traumas and are therefore exclusive only to Lithuanians, sit at the depth of Lithuania's culture and identity. And I thought that this particular quote was interesting because Tanaka asserts that Sepetys had to be other. She had to be American in order to tell this story. And I think that brings up something interesting about um, how the novel is portrayed through Lena's character. Um, because Lena ultimately, she draws her drawings to spread the word about this buried history. And that's sort of what Sepetys is doing. She's unearthing this sort of buried history, and she's writing it in such a way that it's to American authors. She writes Between Shades of Grey in English. And this kind of brings back Tanaka's point that she had to be other, she had to be American in order for this story to be told. Um, this story wasn't meant for this small group of Lithuanians. The story was meant for the world to see um, what we weren't taught in schools. This was meant for an audience of Americans, really, of Westerners. And I came up with the three R's for how do we interpret this as an American audience today in this climate. First, we should recognize the flaws in our own country's history. We should research the Lithuanian deportations that have become this buried history. I know personally I wasn't taught this in school. It wasn't until I read Between Shades of Grey that I even knew that this happened at all. So I think that Sepetys really just brings light to this history that we aren't taught. And I also think that we should remember the victims. Um, so that's all that I have for you guys. So just let me know your thoughts, and I would love to hear them. Thanks for listening.